Hello. Hello, and welcome. I'm Mehran Khalili. We are DM25, a radical political movement for Europe. And this is another live stream with subversive ideas you won't hear anywhere else. And today, well, we're 2 years on from the October 7th attacks and Israel's ensuing genocide of Palestinians. And yes, the horrors that Israel is visiting upon civilians in Gaza are tragically continuing. But there have been some developments since we last tackled this topic a couple of weeks ago. The global Sumud Flotilla, an effort to supply aid by breaking the Gaza blockade, was intercepted by Israel 6 days ago. They abducted and detained activists, allegedly abusing several, later deporting many. Also, Hamas and Israel have now restarted indirect talks in Egypt around a US-backed peace plan for Gaza. And now that Israel is deservedly a global pariah, the country's PR machine is shifting up a gear with influencer programs, paid posts, massive ad campaigns, and even a mobile October 7th exhibit tour. So we're here to sift through it all, as ever, through an activist lens. And we have our own Yanis Varoufakis here with us to do it, as well as someone I'm delighted to welcome back to our live streams, Katie Halper, the American journalist, host of the Katie Halper Show, and co-host of the Useful Idiots podcast. And you out there, if you've got thoughts, comments, rants, anything you want to say on this, please put it in the YouTube chat and we'll put it to our panel. Let me start off with the flotilla and I'll just tee it up with you with some facts. So, as I said, 6 days ago, Israel swooped in and detained roughly 479 people. It's now deported about 340 of them. Among those released, our colleague David Adler, who you're going to hear from, albeit indirectly, in a minute. Israel, Spain and Turkey supplied military escorts and surveillance drones to assist the flotilla initially, but then they withdrew, leaving the activists on it exposed. There have been widespread allegations of Israel abusing its detainees, including multiple testimonies alleging beatings, humiliation, deprivation. Israel, of course, calls this fake news. And 138 other activists remain in detention in Israel. More than 40 were confirmed to be on hunger strike on Sunday, according to the flotilla organizers. So, Yanis, I'm going to hand it over to you. I know you've got some kind of breaking news and an update from the ground over there from David. Yanis.
Thank you, Mehran. Thank you, Katie. It's good to have you back on DMTV. Just a couple of points before I introduce you to the news that is coming. It just arrived here in my inbox from David Adler. Israel has claimed that the flotilla crews violated a security zone and that they were effectively spoiled brats from the West, mostly from the West, who were entering a war zone. Let's be clear on this. They never entered a war zone. This is not a war zone. Firstly, they were on international waters. They had every right to be there. Secondly, it's not a war zone. It's a genocide zone. There's a very big difference there. Gaza and its waters, according to international law, are a no-go area for Israel. In June 2024, the International Court of Justice, not criminal law, the Court of Justice, ordered Israel to vacate the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. So essentially, the only pirates, the only violators of international law are the Israeli forces. They abducted our people, the people who were entering that area, not just to deliver food, because there was this was another crafty part of the Israeli propaganda. They said, well, why don't they give us the food? We will deliver it. Because you genocidal maniacs, part of your strategy is to deny the people of Gaza food and water, according to your own Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and all the other genocidal loonies. You have been denying the people of Gaza food, medicine, and water for 2 years now. And you have boasted about that. So you expect the humanitarian flotilla to hand over their medicine, food, and water to you? So what? That you added to the stockpile of food and medicine that you are denying the Gazan people. So let's be clear on this. Our people simply wanted to break, as is our, not just want, but as is our duty, this siege of the Gaza Strip, the purpose of which is to complete the genocide of the Palestinian people. Now, enough on this from me, because as Mehran announced and I alluded to, We just received word from David Adler. David Adler is a US citizen. He's an American Jew. He is an intricate part of DiEM25 and the Progressive International, a co-organizer of the Progressive International. And he has been sending the world, not just us, regular updates during the flotilla's sailing. And as an American Jew, you can imagine that the Israeli authorities had a special, how shall I put it, quarrel with him, because effectively, by being there, he blew up into smithereens the narrative that this was a Hamas-funded anti-Semitic flotilla. It was no such thing. It was an anti-genocide flotilla, and the Jewish members of the flotilla, including David Adler, who were part of that, were dealing anti-Semitism a major blow, because there is nothing more anti-Semitic than to try to cover up for the Israeli war crimes by saying that they were done on behalf of the Jewish people. So, without further ado, let's listen to the report that we just received from David Adler concerning what happened after their abduction by the IDF.
This is David Adler, now in Amman, Jordan, having been only recently liberated from an internment camp in the Negev desert, where I was held with hundreds of other participants of the global Sumud flotilla for 5 days in horrific conditions that have yet to be reported. When we were intercepted illegally and violently by Israeli naval forces, many of which were caught on CCTV, others of which were not caught on CCTV, such as the case of our Owaila, which was targeted by a barge that sought to destroy and sink our boats. Our belongings and our boats were stolen from us. We were kidnapped, stripped, zip-tied, blindfolded, and sent to an internment camp on a police van without any access to food, to water, to legal supports. And for the next 5 days, on and off, we were psychologically tortured. We were taken individually out of our cells for any kind of request for medicine or for other kinds of attention from the guards. People were taken individually out of their cells and regularly beaten and handcuffed, ankle cuffed, and left in solitary confinement. This happened so many times over so many days. And we were asking for the most basic things like critical access to insulin for diabetic detainees that were part of the flotilla. In short, we were treated as terrorists, which is what Ben-Gvir promised he would do. From the first moment that we stepped onto that tarmac after interception, we were violently forced onto our knees into positions of submission, where the two Jews of the flotilla were taken by the ear and ripped from the group for a photo op with Ben-Gvir, staring at the flag of the state of Israel, taunted for his goons. Thus began basically a long 5-day nightmare of serial and systematic violation of our most basic rights. Reports vary from the different cell blocks, but the one report that is consistent is that at times we were denied food and water, at all times we were denied access to medicine based on the whims of individual specific kind of officers working the ships. Any request for a medic was basically denied or delayed infinitely. We had no access to our lawyers or legal representation. Consular services were not able to communicate any information about our condition. That goes without saying that there were other instruments of psychological warfare that were deployed against us. I'm shocked that more of this information hasn't come to light, but I'm confident that now that the last 130 detainees have been released to Jordan, that reporters can take up the question of what exactly happened to these humanitarian workers that were intercepted illegally by Israeli naval forces after they arrived at the port of Ashdod. They were not taken to a regular prison. They were driven deep into the Negev desert, basically to the border with Egypt, where we heard, F-16s and F-35s overhead every night going to bomb Gaza to the sound of German shepherds that would menace us every day. Every single day, riot groups would come to our cells with tear gas and riot gear and German shepherds that would come into our cells and seek to kind of terrify and terrorize us. And yeah, I mean, these were not at all normal prison conditions. I'm obviously very aware that not all of this pales in comparison to the treatment that Palestinians endure every single day. 11,000 of them that are in indefinite detention at the moment, including in the same internment camp where we were held as terrorists by the state of Israel. But what has not been reported so far is the way that humanitarian workers were not treated. We were never told we committed a crime. We never saw a judge, other than one who simply made a summary with we never saw a judge with a lawyer and a prosecutor. We saw one judge who basically said, "Do you want to go home?" And we said, "Of course we want to go home. We didn't ask to come here. We were kidnapped and abducted and sent here illegally." And so it's obviously a critical part of the story that just to look into what are the conditions normally at those camps, who's held at that camp, why were we sent there, and of course, what did people endure kind of day to day as a marker of how rogue the state of Israel has become in its utter disregard for basic international humanitarian law that should have been protecting us. And so that's, I think, the critical message that we're trying to send now from the U.S. delegation and others who have been just released today in the U.S. delegation's case with absolutely zero consular services. We arrived at the Jordanian border. The U.S. consul told us, general consul said, "We are not your babysitters. You have no food, no water, no money, no phones, no planes. We're taking you straight, no visa. We're taking you straight to the airport and you're on your own. We are not your babysitters." They repeated this 4 or 5 times to us as if we needed to be told. I mean, this is the kind of Ben-Gvir Trumpian nightmare that we've been living for the past days. So, my sincere hope is that, we can pick up a story from interception and detention to the real story of basically how Ben-Gvir got his way with this group of activists, school teachers and nurses and medics and people from around the world who were just trying to, deliver this aid, how that became this basically what felt like, an unending, day-to-day sleepless, oftentimes foodless and horrific treatment in the cell blocks of this internment camp. This is David App.
Well, I think that no further words are necessary from me. Just noting that there are 12,000 Palestinians in even worse conditions under the genocidal thumb of maniacs like Ben-Gvir. The United States government is adopting exactly the same strategy, not just the Trumpian government. Remember Rachel Corrie, who was smashed to bits by an IDF bulldozer in 2003. The United States doesn't care about its citizens if they do not toe the imperialist line in places like Palestine. Over to you, Mehran.
Thanks for that, Yanis. Wow, what a dramatic intervention. Katie, let me hand it over to you for your reaction and how should we be thinking about all of this which is going on with the flotilla? I think you're muted, Katie.
We don't need any more muting with all the Zionist censorship out there. I just did them a favor. Thank you so much for having me. That was incredibly moving and inspiring to hear. And I, co-sign everything that Yanis just said. I think that what we're seeing with the flotilla is an important act of solidarity. It does shed a light on what's happening. It's in some ways a kind of microcosm. And it's interesting because a lot of us have talked about how there's this imperial boomerang and what happens abroad is visited on us domestically. Of course, it's not the same violence or repression at all, but it's almost like the domestic version of it. And here people are kind of bringing that, the treatment of the domestic population to Palestine or close to Palestine. I think that it's very exciting that the flotilla has made more progress this time than any other time before. It broke into the waters. I know that there are other flotillas that are being organized as we speak. And I think that, it's a way to give people hope, which is really important. We interviewed the other day Diana Butu, and she was just saying, we can't give up hope. We can't, because we just don't have that luxury. And I think that it's a way to also give people who aren't there a sense of contribution and meaning. We have to also realize this is a symbolic voyage in many ways, but it does again highlight what kind of lengths Israel will go to be able to continue to starve a population. And I do think that, unfortunately, people probably do have some fatigue seeing Israel slaughter Palestinians during this genocide. And I mean, I feel kind of uncomfortable saying this, but I think that it probably is helpful for people to see a new population that's being targeted, because I think people have become so numb and used to this genocide that I think this probably wakes some people up. And, because of the way that people view Palestinians, even I would say people who support Palestinians, there's kind of built-in dehumanization for lots of people. And seeing this happen to people who usually live lives that are defined by having the luck of being born where they're born, I think we're seeing this is a different experience to witness.
Katie, while you have the floor, how was the flotilla framed in the U.S. media? How was that narrative received over there? The Israel's provocation is the claim that Israel made, that calling the flotilla a provocation versus the humanitarian mission that it actually was. What was it that pierced through, if anything?
Well, I think sadly the biggest the most salient thing about it, the coverage, was the lack of coverage. And then when it was covered, it certainly was not presented with the urgency that it required. And as usual, I mean, we see a totally anti-Israel, pro-Israel bias consistently from Western media and from the U.S. media in particular. And I would say the U.S. media is probably the worst, although you guys may can respond and talk about whether English British media is as bad. But it hasn't really broken through mainstream media that much. And, like CNN reports or other mainstream media outlets frame it as an interception, what Israel's doing, an interception. They say it's intercepted it. They say it's stopped it. They say that the activists have been detained. They don't describe it as like illegal piracy, an illegal act of piracy committed by Israel. They don't describe it as kidnapping, taking hostage without any jurisdiction to do so. They don't highlight at all the ways that Israel is not only breaking international law through their treatment of Palestinians, but also through their treatment of the people on the flotilla. And something else that I think has been really absent from the discussion is the fact that, Israel has in the past killed people on a flotilla. This was now I guess 15 years ago. I believe, right? When the Marva was intercepted, was stopped, and Israeli soldiers actually got onto the ship and killed people. And I think that's also an important thing for people to be reminded of, because this is part of Israel's history and precedent for how they treat people. And I think they shouldn't be allowed to get away with that. They certainly were allowed to get away with that, but I think that the world should be reminded of that every chance that we get.
Thank you, Katie. Yanis, can I bring you back in for any further comments on that, especially with regard to how the whole flotilla action has been received in the West?
Well, it is undoubtedly true that the worst coverage has been in Germany. The German establishment has, in its infinite wisdom, decided to swap German nationalism for Zionism and to give no quarter whatsoever to any criticism of Israel without lambasting it for being anti-Semitic. So in Germany, you're not allowed to oppose genocide, unless, of course, it is committed against, in a historical space, against the Jewish people. The idea of never again has never rubbed off on the German establishment. We know that. Also, let me say that I was in Britain during the last 10 days or so. I happened to be in a BBC studio when the news broke out about the knifing, the stabbing of two Jewish members of a synagogue in Manchester, a horrific event. And the first question I was asked was, well, shouldn't you now stop the marches against Israel? And I said, well, I've never heard anything more anti-Semitic than that. Because what you're effectively telling me is that the rights of Jews not to be attacked as Jews, just because they're Jews, coincide with the right of Israel to commit genocide. And that if you're opposing one, you must not be opposing the other. I really have not heard of anything that constitutes greater fuel for anti-Semitism than that allegation. So it is important to carry on making that distinction. And just one more thing, if I may. The other ploy by supporters of Israel's right to ethnically cleanse, to commit genocide, to dehumanize Palestinians, to effectively eradicate Palestinian life from the land of Palestine, is that, somehow there is a war between Israel and Gaza, and, all is fair in war and love, as they say. There is no war in Gaza. We have to keep reminding people that, especially the allegation that this is something that happened on the 7th of October, 2023, we have to remind people that Gaza is an open prison created in 1948 for people that were thrown out of their homes in the surrounding areas. They are refugees that were encased in effectively a concentration camp back in 1948. So, 85% of the people who are being killed and maimed now in Gaza are the descendants of refugees, of people who were illegally thrown out of their homes and put in a refugee camp, in a concentration camp. And then, since then, they are being bombarded at regular intervals, year in, year out. Let us remember that, because especially, Mehran, when we start discussing the Trump plan, this is quite crucial. Let's say that somebody waves a magic wand and Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, every Palestinian man, woman, and child says, yes, let's do what Trump says. What's going to happen then? What is going to happen then? A continuation of what started in 1948, the eradication of the Palestinians and their rights in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in East Jerusalem.
Thank you, Yanis. A couple of quick comments from the chat here on the Flotilla. Mary K. Ryan says, David Adler is what we expect of Jews who have a history of standing against oppression, no matter to whom it is being directed. It is Netanyahu, his thugs, and the rogue state of Israel that is a disgrace to Judaism. Elsa says that the flotilla was always a symbolic action from the start, and that's okay. Riel notes that there's no coverage anywhere in mainstream media, he or she means of the flotilla. A shout out to outlets like Novara Media for pushing it on Instagram and the direct live streams there. If I can, unless there's something further to add on this, I would like to move to the second sort of segment here on Israel's new PR blitz. Yes, amid its live streamed genocide of Palestinians, Israel is, of course, increasingly isolated. Even Netanyahu admits as much, but the country is pushing back now with a PR blitz on multiple fronts, the largest campaign of its kind. According to filings and reports that have only just come to light, Israel has launched something called the Esther Project, an influencer program targeting Generation Z. It pays video stars $7,000 for pro-Israel posts. Also, the country is spending $1.5 million on AI-driven social media activity, $4.1 million on ads targeting Christians in the US, and there's a tour of US cities and campuses with exhibits and VR October 7th experiences. Israel's foreign ministry has been allocated a total of $150 million in this year's budget for PR efforts. So this is just a fraction of what's come to light, and globally, I'm sure there's a lot more. So it's going to become increasingly difficult to know what is genuine advocacy for Israel and what is paid for, or what has the Israel government behind it. At the same time, a pro-Israel constellation of billionaires have bought TikTok's US unit, the key platform for Palestine activism, and as you'll know too very well, Katie, in one of the big three American TV networks, CBS, is now led by a self-described Zionist fanatic, the journalist Barry Weiss. Katie, as a key watcher of these things, what do you think we should be thinking about all of this? Israel's PR blitz, the shifting landscapes for the pro-Israel narrative?
Well, I think that something we should also add to Barry Weiss's illustrious biography is that she has a rich history of trying to get Palestinian professors fired. She tried to do that at Columbia when she was a student there. She failed to do that, but it's a rich irony, given that she positions herself as someone who embraces debate, free speech, and opposes censorship and cancel culture. I think that, the question of PR actually really relates to something that Yanis was just talking about, which is that Israel and its defenders present Israel as a project that exists to protect the lives of Jews and to defend Jews and create Jewish safety. And it's important to note that while the victims, the primary victims of Israel's genocide are, of course, Palestinians, also, the people of Lebanon, the people of Syria, the people of Yemen. We can't forget how internationalist Israel is in its aggression. Israel makes Jews less safe. And I say this because it's important for people out there. Now, there's some people who are not going to be reached by this no matter what. But there are some people, I think, who are in good faith really think that Israel exists to make people safe. And I just want to mention and kind of emphasize that it never existed for that purpose. And maybe that's a little bit of too bitter of a pill to swallow. And I should be less radical in my analysis here and just focus on whether it keeps Jews safe right now. We can get into that history. But, if you look at the Zionists during the Holocaust, the priority for them was not saving the lives of Jews. It was to build a state. And Ben-Gurion has this really chilling quote where he says, David Ben-Gurion, who is the prime minister of Israel, he said, if he given the choice of saving half the number of Jewish children by sending them to Palestine and twice the number of Jewish children by sending them to England, he'd send half of them to Palestine, which kind of crystallizes the priorities, right? The priority was not saving Jewish lives. You also had Zionists engaging in terrorism against Jewish populations in countries in like Egypt and Iraq in order to get Jews to leave. And this is just a consistent thread where a nationalist project is is the priority that is happy to sacrifice the lives of Jews. Israel is not safe for Jews because, for many reasons, but primarily right now because it's literally live streaming a genocide and saying that it's being done in the name of Jews. And it has a Jewish star on its flag. And most of the world, rightly, opposes what Israel's doing. And sometimes Jews like me will be called self-loathing Jews or anti-Semites. And I just want to say the irony is that while my primary motivation is not about Jews, it's about what's being done to Palestinians. The irony is Jews who speak out against Israel are making Jews more safe. Jews who support what Israel's doing are helping Israel make Jews less safe. And that's an important thing to remember. And you can look at when people are doing PR for Israel, that's obviously what they're claiming. But you can look at Israel's allies and ask yourself if you really think that the evangelical Christians who want Jews to go back to Palestine, where we can all, I think 400 of us get to convert and everyone else burns in eternal damnation. Ask yourselves if these are really people who care about Jews and anti-Semitism. In terms of the PR, I think that it's working less and less, and evidence of it not working is the fact that they're paying these total hacks. I mean, I almost feel bad for Israel because these people are so talentless. But you had these people being paid $7,000 per video, and they're just such atrocious videos. And the fact that you need to pay people speaks to the fact that, you know, there is not an organic movement of people who care about this in a way that there is on the other side, because the people who are fighting for Palestinian freedom don't need to be paid, right? We are out there in the streets every day. And if you look at the discourse of what people are saying who are pro-Israel, this is just something I've noticed. It's really often quite vile. And you can even hear what they're saying to not just about Palestinians, but I mean, there's a recent video where you see a guy calling these Jewish anti-Zionists slurs. He's calling them anti-Semitic slurs. He's saying violent things against them. I think that also you see, excuse me, a lot of wishing like ill on people, wishing violence on people. Unfortunately, though, there is the continuation of certain propaganda tropes. For instance, the beheaded babies narrative is still pushed. The rape narrative is still pushed. This is something that's like particularly upsetting, I find, because the reality is that there's a documented rape culture among the IDF of Palestinians. And there's been rapes that have been literally captured on video. And you don't have to be conspiracy theorists to think that. You can just watch Israeli media where they cover it. And, you know, you have these literal right to rape protests. The fact that that's not covered and this mass rape hoax attributed to Hamas is still covered really does show how biased our media is. One thing I will say, though, is that I was on Sky News the other day, and they did cover, right after my segment on Charlie Kirk, they did cover the flotilla, which was encouraging.
Good, thank you for that, Katie. Yanis, what's your take on Israel's latest PR blitz and narrative warfare in general around this issue?
Thankfully, I don't think it's working. As Katie says, it's transparently desperate. And, you know, the only silver lining out of this genocide is that the Israeli army has become sensationally unpopular, let's put it that way, across the world, not just in the global majority, the global south, but also in places like Britain, Germany, France, here, and so on. But I have to say that Israel doesn't really need to work very hard because they have Donald Trump. And I think this is perhaps the time to start discussing Donald Trump's plan, because by tabling it, even though it is something like, you know, when I first read it, I thought Philip K. Dick, the famous science fiction writer, probably took a very large dose of psychedelics and came back to life and wrote that plan, because it is total madness what it is proposing. We'll discuss the details. But nevertheless, the fact that it was accepted as a good foundation for moving forward by the governments of Britain, of France, of Canada, and Australia, that had just recognized formally, hypocritically, but formally, the state of Palestine. That fact that it was accepted by every Arab government, even by the Palestinian Authority, as a good first step towards ending the genocide and sorting out the mess in Gaza, as you know, as the Donald has presented it. That was a stupendous gift to Netanyahu and his gang, because now he is being effectively he scripted that plan. It's not the Trump plan; it's the Netanyahu plan that Trump adopted and edited a little bit. Yeah, manipulated slightly to suit his supersized ego, and so that is the greatest discursive propaganda victory of Israel, that we're now seriously grappling with a plan that should have been rejected without even looking deeply into its contents.
Thank you, Yanis. Well, since we're now talking about the plan, Katie, can I get your comment about it? I know it's something that you've discussed recently on the Useful Idiots podcast. I think you called it a statehood minus, and noted that it doesn't guarantee an immediate halt to the bombing, and also was cooked up without any input from any Palestinians. Put some flesh
Right.
on that and tell us
Yeah,
what
I
you think.
mean, it was Dan Senor, who said that statehood minus, which I actually appreciated when he said that on Free Zakaria, because it's an honest assessment of what they're offering the Palestinians. And, Yitzhak Rabin, who was killed because he was being too conciliatory towards Palestinians, he was also offering, the myth of the two-state solution. He was also offering statehood minus. I think that, this peace plan is, as Yanis said, it's really a Netanyahu plan with some editing that was allowed to be done by Trump. But then, if you look at the released, what's it called, track changes document, you can see that, of course, Netanyahu, in a perfect metaphor, had the final word and the red pen to go through it. He made sure to take out, for instance, like a guarantee that they wouldn't bomb Qatar. So bombing Qatar is on the table. I think that, the silver lining to this is that that Trump supporters, America firsters, with whom I don't share an ideology, obviously, but we kind of coincide, I think, in some ways, not ideologically, but in terms of opposing support for Israel, they are seeing through Trump's propaganda, because it's so clear that America is not being America first when it comes to Israel. You even had Tammy Bruce of the State Department saying something like America is the greatest country in the world, or something, but except for Israel, or something like that. I can't remember her exact words. I'm paraphrasing, but it was that blatant. What do they say? Like, Democrats revile their base, Republicans fear them. And so I actually think, sadly, there's more potential for the needle to move or policy to change because of what the Trump voters are saying or doing. I don't want to be overly idealistic. It's not, and believe me, this is not because Trump is is democratic and cares about what his constituents want. It's that I think he's more concerned about trying to get a Nobel Peace Prize. So I think he's not an ideologue. Well, we all know he's not an ideologue the way that some Democrats are. He's not an ideologue when it comes to Zionism. His ideology is opportunism. I'm obviously not saying anything new here. But yeah, my hope is that people are seeing through this more and more. And I think that they are. The plan is, again, referring to Diana Butu, who we had on Useful Idiots. And slight little plug, I'm having John Mearsheimer and Susan Abu Hawa on my show tonight, on the Katie Halper show, and we're going to be talking about this. But, Diana Butu, who's a Palestinian lawyer and has worked doing diplomacy for Palestine, she points out that this is not a plan of freedom. This is not a plan that gives Palestinians freedom or self-determination or peace or really even choice. And it's just so funny, because Hamas has said for a while now that they are willing to give up ruling Gaza. And the fact that they keep talking about that and harping on that as if that's something that Hamas hasn't already said they're willing to do is very telling.
Thank you, Katie. Yanis, I mean, if I understand you right, your take is that the plan should have been dismissed out of hand. So what leverage actually exists now? I mean, we talked last time, we had a live stream about the recognitions of the Palestinian state. Is there anything that can force an equitable, rights-based settlement for the Palestinians at all?
Well, we all want to believe that in the long run, justice wins, simply because injustice collapses under the weight of its own hubris. So I'll stick to that hope. But allow me to say why I think that the Trump plan should be immediately dismissed without giving it any kind of kudos or any grounds for discussing it sensibly and rationally. Look, essentially what it amounts is to this, that Donald Trump will annex personally the Gaza Strip. It's not even as if the British Empire is coming back to Palestine to proclaim it a protectorate. It's not even a protectorate of the United States of America. It is a piece of land that will be annexed personally to some company that will be chaired. The chairman of the board will be the Donald, right? And he chooses to appoint as its CEO, its chief executive officer, a gentleman who used to be Prime Minister of Britain, who has a very good CV for doing this job because he himself has demonstrated an infinite capacity to violate international law, to set the United Nations aside, essentially to treat it with contempt, and to invade parts of the Middle East, with the result, along with George W. Bush, if you remember, and of course I'm referring now to Tony Blair, with the result of hundreds of thousands, if not up to 1 million dead Arabs, dead people. So this is the proposal. The proposal is Trump is taking it over. Remember that awful but also laughable AI-generated video of what the Trump Gazan Riviera will look like? This is the plan. The plan is he's taking it over. The only concession he's made since that AI-generated video is that he's not going necessarily to expel the Palestinians. He's not going necessarily to expel the Palestinians. There is no commitment as to accountability. His company, himself as chairman of the board, and the warmonger Tony Blair, the CEO, are not accountable to anyone. The United Nations only appears in that plan as the provider of food. They have no opinion about how the place will be run, what investments will be made. Is there going to be a Trump Tower? Will there be a casino? Will the Palestinians be allowed into the casino? Or will they simply be used as indentured labor? Or even not that. Maybe they can be placed in a pen, in an iron pen next door, and fed scraps from the table of the people who play in the casino. That is all utterly consistent with the plan as it was presented. The genocide continues. Israel has no commitment to stop bombing, to leave, to vacate the premises, according to the International Court of Justice. The International Court of Justice has no say. The International Criminal Court that indicted Netanyahu is effectively annulled. Now, this is not a plan. And, I was looking at Keir Starmer the other day in London, the Prime Minister of Britain, and Emmanuel Macron, and Albanese, the Prime Minister of Australia, and Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. I was thinking, how can they face themselves in the mirror? I mean, only a week or two ago, they recognized the Palestinian state. Then immediately, the moment Netanyahu tells Trump to present a new plan, this abomination, these people say, oh, this is a good idea. Now, hang on a second. You recognized the Palestinian state only a week ago. This plan is the end of any prospect of any Palestinian state ever. Because if you take Gaza and you turn it into a Riviera, and the Gazans are denigrated to being non-humans who will simply not be expelled, like, stray dogs that you promise not to push out of beyond the borders. How dare you talk about having recognized a Palestinian state? You have already taken back your recognition of the Palestinian state. But you see, our leaders in the West have no compunction whatsoever. They really don't care. I mean, they know that we all know that they are hypocrites and that their word is not worth the paper that it is printed on. And the worst part of it, once upon a time, even the most dictatorial, right-wing, fascistic leaders cared about what people thought. These people don't even care about what we think. They don't even care what they think about themselves. We have the total demolition of minimum ethical standards, both at the discursive level and the level of action. But allow me to finish on a slightly positive note. No, actually on a positive note. The people of Gaza, the people of East Jerusalem, the people of the West Bank have not stopped resisting. Even in the middle of all this total ethical failure of the West, in the middle of the genocide, they tell us that, for them, existence is resistance. And they will never give up. The genocidal soldiers of the IDF, some of whom happily, some of whom unhappily, massacred children, women, men in Gaza. I have no doubt that at some point when they go home, they have families, they have children, just like the veterans that returned from Vietnam to the United States in the 1960s and 1970s. lost the capacity to reproduce themselves as human beings. They ended up depressed. They ended up committing suicide, many of them, alcoholics, broken people who never forgave the United States regime for sending them to Vietnam to commit atrocities. I'm sure that these people are going eventually, their conscience is going to eventually catch up with them. So the combination of the resistance of the Palestinian people and the complete collapse of the psychology of the families of those soldiers who committed those atrocities in Israel. Now that may be the silver lining. That may be a kind of glimmer of light at the end of this awful tunnel. And the light must all be about equal political rights for Israelis, Palestinians, Armenians, Jews, Muslims, atheists residing between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
Thank you, Yanis, for that hopeful note. Katie, your reaction?
Yeah, I just wanted to add some hope to this discussion following Yanis's lead, and that is that Israel's popularity is indeed plummeting. People are finally seeing Israel for what it is. Of course, that hasn't translated into policy shift yet, but we know that policy shifts don't happen without the public opinion change. And so let's see, 59% of Americans hold unfavorable views of the Israeli government. 6 of 10 American voters oppose sending military aid to Israel. Half think Israel is committing a genocide, and more Americans side with Palestinians than Israelis. So the tides are turning, and that is, of course, despite Israeli Hasbara and PR, and extremely well-funded PR, because if you have a conscience, you just can't ignore these crimes. And in large part, it's because, thank God for small favors, the IDF is happy to live stream their crimes against humanity. I mean, we've all seen the images of them dressed in the lingerie of women who they've ethnically cleansed, if not done more to. We've seen them celebrate bombing schools, mosques. So again, it's actually, it's the opposite of the banality of evil. It's like the celebration of evil. It's a instead of a mechanization. I mean, they do that too, but it's more of a gleeful, celebratory spectacle of violence than we saw, for instance, in Nazi Germany. And I've interviewed a lot of people of various backgrounds who have said that they always avoided the comparison between Israel and Nazis. And of course, it's not an exact parallel, but there is, you can't. In fact, Daniel Levy, who was a peace negotiator for Israel, I interviewed him for this documentary I'm working on about Holocaust survivors and their descendants speaking out against Israel. And he said to me, it's such a taboo to ever compare what Israel is doing to what the Nazis did. But it's almost like they're daring us not to by what they're doing. I'd made a video with Double Down News where I talked about this because, you can't claim to found a country on never again. And then do stuff that's not, sure, it's not identical, but you can't do that and then create a genocidal state without obviously daring the world to draw these connections. And I think that, people who before could not make that comparison, so many of them have told me that they find themselves unable to not make the comparison. Again, it's not apples to apples. It's not an exact parallel. But especially when you claim to have a nation that exists to in response to Nazism and never again, you really can't have a never again for anyone but for Jews only.
Thank you, Katie. A couple of comments from the chat. Hazy says, this weekend and today, thousands of people in Germany are going out to the streets against the genocide in Palestine, proving that the government does not represent Germans. I mean, to add some stats to what you just said there, Katie, in Germany, which is Israel's second largest arms supplier, and its government is a big cheerleader for Israel, a poll conducted by YouGov found that 62% of Germans believe that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. That's just a couple of weeks ago. So we see that the governments are really out of step with the public, and as you say, it's probably only a matter of time until these things catch up and end up biting the governments. The Mon El says, whenever there was hope for a ceasefire, we saw an escalation. I would expect that we will see an attack on Iran in the next time. Yes, Netanyahu's already talking about that again. Usuario says the Zionists will normalize the camps in extermination camps in occupied Palestine with this surrender plan. Manny notes that taking over the politics of countries by money used to be an anti-Semitic trope. It's now the reality in the USA. And a last commenter says, Israel's current government is the first one feeding anti-Semitism and using it to oppress, silence, and murder again and again. So as we reach the waning minutes of our hour here, is there anything among any of those things, to hand it back to you, Yanis, that you'd like to respond to, or any closing comments on anything we've discussed here?
Yes, I'd like to make a point regarding the relationship and the feedback effect between the war crimes of Israel and the rise of fascism in our countries. Fascists started life in the mid-war period with the narrative of purifying the nation, like the family, return to a patriarchal nation that resembles the family with a great patriarch, who makes sure that impurities are kept out of the bloodline of the family. Back then, the impurities were the Jews. Across Europe, not only in Germany, but across Europe, the anti-Semitic trope was very strong in the rise of fascism, not just fascism, but conservatism as well. And the end of the Second World War and the exposure of what happened in the death camps of the Holocaust made this very hard for fascists. But the fascists, however, since then have devised a new technique for effectively whitewashing themselves. They adopted Zionism, and they adopted the support of the war crimes of the Israeli state in order to enhance their fascistic narrative. So again, I'll make you great again. I'll make you proud again. I'm going to be a patriarch through the manosphere that, brings women back, pushes them back into their pen, into their domestic realm. I'm going to purify the nation. This time it is from the Muslims. It's Islamophobia. And look, I'm not a racist because I now support Israel. I support I have not stopped supporting genocide, but now I support the Israeli genocide. And therefore I am cleansing myself through embracing Zionism. And that explains, for instance, this imagery which some of us had very serious difficulty coming to terms with a few years back. But now, from what I just said, we are coming to terms with that. The imagery I'm referring to is the swastika next to the Star of David in American demonstrations of the ultra-right wing. That is what's going on. The embrace of the right and duty of Israel to commit genocide against the Palestinians is the washing machine that whitewashes the white racist patriarchal fascists and allows them to say, well, we're not racist anymore. We just want a pure nation. We want our nation back. We want to reclaim our borders. We want purity. But there is this very, very clear lineage that starts in the 1920s and continues today.
Thanks, Yanis. Let me just ask you something on that as a final question. I mean, I see that Netanyahu is really pushing this clash of civilizations narrative, that we're doing the dirty work for you, that we're pushing back against the Muslim hordes and so on. And I wondered, to what extent do you think non-Jewish support in Europe for Israel is really just a way of posturing against Muslims in their own countries?
Oh, 1,000,000%. There's no doubt about that. Here in Greece, where you and I live, it's absolutely clear. I mean, I get assaulted on Twitter, in posts all over the place. As a self-hating Greek, because I do not side with Israel's genocide of the Muslims, because this is what my assailants proclaim, we face an existentialist threat from the Muslim terror of Turkey. And if Israel is killing some of those Muslims, then that's certainly good for us. And me opposing the genocide of the Palestinians is an example of me not being patriotic and not caring enough about the security and safety of my own people. So, fascists of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your misanthropy.
Thank you, Yanis. Katie, closing comments from you, your reaction, anything you wanted to add? Go for it.
Excuse me, yeah. Well, Tony Greenstein, who is the author of this great book called Zionism During the Holocaust, he says, we were both at the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress, which was held in Vienna. And a point that he likes to make is that if every single, if the West's Zionists all stop being Zionists, or if people stop being pro-Israel, nothing would change. Like the West would still support Israel. This goes to kind of the question that you just asked about non-Jewish support, I would say, of Israel, because Israel, again, is a colonial outpost. And we didn't really talk about this element of it, but it is a way for the West to have a foot in that area. It was also a way to solve the Jewish problem, right? The narrative is that the West felt so guilty about the Holocaust that they had to support Jews, quote unquote, support Jews in creating this new state. Of course, if they had actually felt guilty, they would have let the Jews into their states, into their countries, because most Jews did not want to go. They wanted to go to the West after the Holocaust, most Jews. So I do think it's an important thing to remember that there's a lot of built-in, there's a lot of structural reasons that the West supports Israel. If we are successful, which we have to be, in proving that supporting Israel is not saving Jews, if we're successful in proving that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, which of course it's not, and as Yanis referred to earlier today in our discussion, and I've made this point many times, the claim that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism is in itself anti-Semitic. It's this anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalty. It suggests, no, it doesn't suggest. It's based on the premise that all Jews are a monolith who support genocide. But again, once we get rid of that, once we are able to debunk that, it doesn't mean that the West will stop supporting Israel. It'll be harder for them to pretend that they're doing it for moral reasons. So that will hopefully hasten the collapse of that support and bring an end to the apartheid state of Israel as it exists now. And there will be a one state with equal rights. But I do think it's important to remember that part of it, that, all of the discourse about a safe place for Jews and caring about Jews is a facade, and that there are many reasons unrelated to that for which the West supports Israel. Now, that's different. When I talk about the West, I'm talking about the elites, the political elites, the arms industry, the nanotechnology industry. The masses don't care about that. The masses, I think, have been duped into thinking, but less and less, and they're waking up into thinking this is a moral issue. But we have to be clear-eyed about what motivates our governments.
Thank you, Katie. And as you say, I mean, that's extremely precarious for Israel, because they're not supporting Israel for moral reasons. They're supporting them for their own self-interested reasons. If those self-interested reasons are satisfied elsewhere, they may just abandon the state of Israel, the apartheid state of Israel as we know it. Guys, thank you so much for your time. We're at the end of the hour. Thank you, Yanis. Thank you, Katie. If you would like to catch Katie's show, it's who did you say was speaking to today? Susan Abu Halwa and John Mearsheimer.
Yeah, at 7
on the
p.m.
Katie Halper show.
Eastern Standard. Yeah, youtube.com/the Katie Halper show. And if you can't watch it live, if you're in Europe and not
7 p.m.
a night owl.
Yep. Sorry, I'm just having some audio problems here.
Oh.
And thank you very much for you guys out there for your comments and thoughts, and we will see you at the same time.